last video, we learned how to fill out the 1-to-4 family residential contract in order to send a offer over to a listing agent. Now I'm going to teach you guys how to properly fill out some of the addendums. Keep in mind that when you are submitting an offer, you also have to submit these addendums along with the offer. And not every addendum is going to be needed. It's completely situation to situation, property to property. So for example, for the example that we're using this property that's listed by Kiani, and that's what we wrote our initial contract over. So let's go back and review our contract and see what addendums we are going to need to add to this document. So we have our buyer, who is John Doe, and our seller, who is Susie Smith. We're going to go down. So here we see in paragraph 3 that we have to add a third-party financing addendum because our client, our hypothetical client, is using a loan, which is going to be a conventional loan. Now, like I mentioned, if your client is assuming a loan, that's its own separate addendum. Or if they're doing seller's financing, that's its own separate addendum as well. So off the bat, we can tell that we're going to need the third-party financing addendum. And then we're going to scroll. There's no leases involved, so we don't need to add any lease addendums. But if you do, this is where you would have it, and you would also need to add it to the transaction. Now, earnest money, all that stuff, we don't need an addendum for this. And as you keep scrolling down, you're just going to look through and be sure that you are adding the right addendums. Now here, this is talking about HOA. If your property is in an HOA, you have to have an HOA addendum. And a lot of times, the listing agent will include a HOA addendum in the listing documents, but it might just be good enough for the seller. You know, it's favoring the seller all the way. So if you don't agree, or if your clients, they don't want to go by what the original HOA addendum is saying, you will have to draft up your own. But either way, if your property is in an HOA, you have to have an addendum, whether that's the one that the listing agent has added or if the one that you're going to create yourself. And then as you scroll down, you're going to get here, all of this stuff is going to need some type of notice. And for example, if your property is in a MUD, you're going to need a MUD notice. If your property is in a PID, you're going to need that notice. Now, those notices should be provided by the seller and the listing agent. So if that property does apply in those scenarios, they would typically include that in the listing documents. And then you're going to keep scrolling down. And as you can see, we don't have any type of addendums that we need to add to this. And you're just going to keep going. And we get to the end of the document. So now we're going to save and exit, and we're going to forms, and we're going to add all of the addendums we need. So the first thing I'm going to add is the third-party financing addendum. And you can see it here. I'm going to add that, and then we're going to add the HOA addendum. And it's going to be addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association. So you're going to add that. That is going to be trek number 3610. And then we are also going to add a non-realty item addendum. I'm not sure if in this example we said that we were going to have anything non-realty, but I just want to add it to show you guys. So you just want to look up non-realty item addendum, and you're going to add that as well. And we're going to add all three. Non-realty item addendum, we're going to do the addendum for property subject to mandatory property owners association, basically, and also the third-party financing addendum. So first thing I'm going to do is start with our third-party financing addendum. But before we do that, we need to go back to our contract and take a look at what we input in paragraph 3. And here you can see that the cash portion that the buyer is paying, which is a down payment, is $136,000, which is 20%. They are going to be financing $544,000, and this is the price that we are offering, right? So what I'm going to do is just take a quick screenshot of this, just so I have it in my mind. And then you want to go back, you're going to save and exit, and we're going to go back to our third-party financing addendum. And here it will have your address on top, and then here it's going to talk about all different types of loans that your buyer could possibly be using. Now, not all of this is going to apply, right? A person who is doing a conventional loan is most likely not going to be doing an FHA insured loan at the same time. So it's going to only be one of these that apply to your situation, right? And they are their own categories, you guys. Like it's going to ask you for different things. There's different things that you have to input. But in this case, we're going to do conventional financing. So what I'm going to do is check this first box. You always want to make sure you check the right box. And then 1 is going to say a first mortgage loan in the principal amount of. This is going to be the amount, the total that they are financing, right? So like we said, we are going to be putting down 20%. So we don't need to put the full price amount that we're offering in here. We only need to put the amount that we are financing. So in this case, it's $544,000. And you also want to be sure that you are checking this first box. Then it asks for how many years the loan is for. So for most conventional loans, it's usually 30 years. It's either 15 or 30 years, but typically people do 30 years. So in this case, we're going to do 30. Now, all of this information, you guys, you can find on your buyer's pre-approval. If you can't, you can always ask your lender. Then it asks for the maximum interest rate that the buyer is willing to accept. And this just protects your buyers. And you would normally take, what the market's looking like, what the interest rates are looking like. And let's say that on their pre-approval, they have a 6.2. Just to be safe here, I'm going to go ahead and put 7%. You want to put a little bit higher than what they have already been offered. So when the time comes and the interest rate for them goes a little bit higher, it's not going to make the deal fall all the way through. And then it's going to ask for how many years the interest rate applies for. For a normal fixed mortgage that never changes, you would put 30 again, or 15 if that's the case. Next, it asks for the origination charges. This is shown on the lender's loan estimate. You put the maximum percentage the lender can charge. For example, it's usually 1%. That means the lender cannot go above that number. The buyer is using any type of second mortgage or anything, that's when you would fill this out. But again, this isn't a typical case and it doesn't always apply. So you want to make sure that you're reading the pre-approval correctly and all that good stuff. Okay, then you get to buyer's approval. So if the buyer is getting a loan, you almost always check the first box. This means that the contract is subject to the buyer getting approved by their lender. And next to this box, you'll see a blank space that asks how many days the buyer has to get their approval. Most agents, put anywhere from 15 to 21 days. I personally always put 21 days to give my buyers that extra protection and time. A lot of times, the agent might even try to negotiate on this with you, but I usually don't budge just for my buyer's protection, just so that we can keep their earnest money safe. So if your buyer's loan was to fall through for any reason, within 21 days after the effective date of the contract, then they can get their earnest money back. If you choose this second box, this contract is not subject to buyers obtaining approval. I really wouldn't recommend it if your buyer is using a loan to do this, because again, your buyer is not going to be protected. And just because they have a pre-approval doesn't always mean that their loan is going to go all the way through. They might not listen to you and go buy a new car, or quit their jobs. You never really know, so you always want to make sure that you are protecting your buyers. And then you're going to scroll down, and this is where it's going to talk about FHA/VA provisions. Again, this does not apply to everyone. This applies to whoever is using FHA or VA financing. So if you are using this, there's going to be another video on how to fill it out for FHA or VA. Then you're going to go ahead and scroll down. This is just going to tell you the disclaimer, authorization to release the information, and then you're going to get to the part where your buyer and seller have to sign. Once you have this completed, you're going to save and exit. And we're going to go ahead and move on to the HOA addendum. So you just want to click on that. And typically you can always find the HOA in the full agent report. And as you can see here, it says management/HOA name. And I'm just going to copy and paste this. So we're going to need the name and the phone number. Once you have that pasted, you get to A, where it's talking about subdivision information. And what subdivision information is, it's literally just a copy of all of the restrictions and rules and bylaws. And it's also a resale certificate. And this is very important to get for your buyers, y'all. Some sellers are weird with this and they just don't want to give it. They don't want to pay for it because sometimes they do have to pay for it. I always check number one, because within blank days, the seller has to obtain, pay for, and deliver the subdivision information to the buyer. If you choose this, number two, this means that your buyer is going to have to obtain, pay for, and deliver the subdivision information. And then three gives you the option that the buyer has already received and approved the certificates and all of that good stuff. And then it'll ask you the buyer does or does not require an updated resale certificate. So 4 is talking about buyer does not require delivery of subdivision information. And what you'll see a lot is listing agents will have this filled out already in the documents of the listing, and then they'll select number 4. Now, I always personally like to get the subdivision information for my clients. I've had to go back and forth a couple times with the listing agent, but in general, you want to make sure that you get that to your clients, and you want to check number 1, and then within blank days, I typically put 15 days. Then it's talking about material changes. So if anything changes, with the subdivision rules, if the information that the seller provides, then you get to see. This is asking for fees and deposit, and it's just asking you one question: what is the maximum amount the buyer is willing to pay for all HOA related fees? So these are things like transfer fees, reserves, account setup fees, association deposits, anything that the HOA charges when a property changes owners. So to fill this out, you write the dollar amount your buyer is comfortable with paying. So here in this example, I'm gonna go ahead and put $200. And then now with section D, this is talking about authorization. And then it's asking you, let's say hypothetically, the buyer did not want the subdivision information, but the title company is requiring it. And it's asking you who is going to be responsible for paying that. And I always put seller, but again, you guys, all of this stuff can be negotiable. And then it's going to bring you here to the notice to buyer regarding repairs by the association. And then it's basically kind of a warning. So the HOA sometimes is responsible for certain repairs. And if the buyers is worried about what all the HOA does or does not cover, that they should get that information before signing the contract. Get to the bottom, and this is where your buyer and the seller would sign. So we're going to save and exit from here as well. We're going to do the non-realty item addendum next. So this is a very, very simple addendum, but you want to make sure that you are very specific and intentional with this addendum. And I'm going to tell you guys why. So let's say hypothetically your client wants the fridge that is coming with the property, right? And they're not paying anything extra for it. But again, it's a non-realty item, so we have to include it in this addendum. And the reason why this is important is because you have to really specify each item with their description, model number, serial numbers, location. Because let me give you guys an example. I think someone told me this story a while ago. The fact that their buyer, they wanted the fridge that was in the kitchen, and it was a gorgeous fridge. It was like a name brand fridge, and in the non-realty item addendum, all they put was refrigerator. They didn't put any type of description, model number, or any of that. So whenever their clients closed on the property, when they went to the property for the after closing, they saw that instead of the beautiful fridge that they thought they were getting a ugly, super worn out old refrigerator, and it was nothing like the one that they originally saw and wanted. And here's the thing, y'all, you can't do anything at that point. You can't go after the seller because you didn't specify exactly what fridge it was that you wanted to keep in the property. And because of that, the sellers can simply just get away with it. Now, this isn't just an example for fridge. This goes for all non-realty items. You want to make sure that you are putting in as much description as you possibly can. Just to protect your buyers from getting pretty much scammed that way. And it's a legal way to scam, even though the seller knows that you wouldn't want that fridge, you never even saw that fridge. They know that in the non-realty item addendum, you didn't mention what fridge. So in their defense, they can put any type of fridge there as they want, right? So here it's going to ask you for the, how much will your clients be paying for the following items? Usually, it's a negotiation between the seller and the buyer. But let's say, for example, that we want the fridge to stay in this situation and we're not paying anything extra for it. So I'm just going to put $0 here, and then it's going to ask us for the description. So I'm going to put Samsung refrigerator, model number. So as you can see, I put Samsung refrigerator. I mentioned the model, and then I put a model number, which this is a random model number, but that's what I put. If you have a serial number, you want to mention the color, you want to mention the location. I even put a year. The more specific you guys are, the more protected your buyers will be. And then you're going to scroll down, and this is just two disclaimers, and then it's going to get to where your clients can go ahead and sign. So once you're ready to get everything signed, you're going to press on your contract, and you're going to press the little pen on top of your screen. And then here is where you can add all of your documents together. So you're going to go to Docs, add document or form, and you're going to add all the documents you need to add. So we already have the 1 to 4 family added. Next, I always add the third-party financing addendum. We're going to add the HOA addendum. We're going to add the non-realty item addendum. If the lead-based paint applied, we would add that here as well. What you want to do is make sure you don't forget the seller's disclosure. You want to make sure that it's signed by your buyers prior to submitting this offer. So I'm going to add that as well. And what you can do is also move these around. So if you want them in a certain order, you can move them around. And as you can see, you have all of your documents in one, and you can send this over to your buyers to sign, and then you can turn it into a PDF and send it directly to the listing agent.